What did you come away learning after hosting that wonderful panel?
I would say the number one thing I came away with is that working from home is here to stay. I don't think looking at what people want to do and some of the studies that have been done that we talked about, as well as the Apple letter, I don't think that mandating people returning to work is a very good idea at all. Uh, I also thought that Linda's point about the number of women who were dropped out of the workforce because of the pandemic was very compelling. And I think as responsible employers, we owe it to those women, as well as anyone else who was disenfranchised by the pandemic, to make sure that we have flexible work policies to enable kind of bringing them back into work. God knows the AEC industry as a whole, where I spent most of my career, could use some help in the diversity department. So, whether it's gender diversity or economic diversity or diversity of any kind, I think that was really interesting. I think the impact on sustainability was also a really good point, as well as the training for middle managers. Those were all, I think, really valuable points to have come out of the discussion.
And in that session, and you just mentioned it briefly here too, you mentioned that really recent Gartner report, where they basically were surveying, employee attitudes about returning to work. What was your initial reaction when you read that data? Was that in line with what you would have expected, or were there elements in that report that were kind of surprising to you?
Well, so I would say that the overall, breakdown of about 25% of people wanting to stay at home and 60% wanting hybrid, and another 15% only wanting to work in the office full time, that did not surprise me. Because that's pretty much in line with the pulse surveys that we've been doing here at Bentley. So that was not unexpected. I thought that the observation that productivity is up was 100% true. That rang very true to me. Although I thought that um, Gartner's actual estimates were low. So I don't know if I mentioned it in the session yesterday, but they estimated between a 13 and 20% increase in productivity during the pandemic, largely due to extended working hours because people were giving back part of their commute time, et cetera, and just overworking.
Yeah.
But that was low compared to my experience. In my experience, my team's productivity has gone up 30 to 35%. So, like, a lot.
Yeah.
So I was a little surprised by that. And the other thing that I was surprised by in that survey was how very black and white people's responses were. The fact that 80% of workers expect flexibility when they come back. I mean, it makes sense if you think about the 66% want hybrid and 25%, want fully remote. I guess that makes sense, but putting it in a number like 80% expect flexibility kind of was a little stark to me. I hadn't added it all up and really thought it through.
Yeah.
And the fact that 1 in 2 people would find a different employer if they don't have flexibility in returning to work, that did surprise me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's significant.
Yeah, I think that is significant. And I think, your point too about the, maybe underestimating or under self-reporting how much, of our extra time we're using, to work more or to whatnot, because we don't have that separation between work and home. It makes sense in a way that it might be lower than it's actually happening, because maybe you're not logging every single hour that you're doing extra outside of out of what you would normally be doing too. And I want to talk to you a little bit just kind of about, that transition to working remotely and kind of facilitating that. So for some companies, like we heard on the panel, the transition of working remotely could be a difficult one, because if you don't have systems already in place or you don't have workstations for folks to bring home, that can be a challenge. But for other companies that, there was already some of this tech infrastructure in place to handle it. How would you say the transition went at Bentley? Did you guys have any kind of lesson learned that might be helpful to others making similar transitions in the future or reacting to changing situations?
So at Bentley, the transition was very easy. We had We have 4,500 employees, and of those 4,500, only 83 had a desktop only. So we were very lucky that it was really easy for everyone to take their laptops home and just go from there. We had enough in stock to be able to give the 83 desktop users laptops. And so that was something that was easy to do. And we were very lucky in the fact that we had already set our network up to be SD-WAN with multiple VPN points all around the world. So we didn't experience a lot of the bottlenecking from a network perspective that companies did at first until they got themselves organized with their architecture. I think a lot of companies struggled during the first few weeks with people just slow reactive time, slow connections, teams not working very well because the traffic was too slow. There weren't enough pipes for all of it.
Right.
And so I think that was a challenge for people. But for us, it was really easy. And it was good because that enabled us to immediately turn our attention to how can we help our customers? What can we do to give them advice? Even practical, stupid things. I mean, it's not stupid, it's important if you're an engineer, but really simple things like how can you use your TV as your monitor? So you're not trying to look at drawings on a laptop screen, that big. Right?
Yes.
In terms of lessons learned, though, I would say number one lesson learned is be prepared.
Mm-hmm.
So not to toot my own horn here, but I am a big ardent fan of international news. I watch a lot of BBC and Sky and all the other ones, and so I've been following the situation in Wuhan and China back in December. And back in December, I put together a plan. I was like, you know what? I don't know. I kind of think this might be coming. Like, I'm pretty sure. So I wrote a memo and I got input from lots of other people of like, what would happen if we had to shut down? What would we need to think about? Where are we prepared? Where are we not prepared? We went ahead and proactively deployed those 83 laptops to the colleagues back in January before anyone was talking about shutdown. We put in place invoicing via email just in case. There were a few things that we did ahead of time to be sure that we would be ready if we did have to send everybody home. Never actually really thinking that for sure it would happen or be as widespread as it was. Our first plan was, well, you know what, if the US has to shut down, we'll just get Dublin to send all the invoices out.
Right.
Then we were like, oh, what if they're both shut down?
Right.
Like, having a plan is important, but I would also say, I think, given this experience, everybody now has a plan, right?
Yep.
Have to work through it and work through all the difficulties of laptops and bandwidth and teams. So I think that's important. But the other thing that I think is really important that we kind of learned along the way was that the people side. It wasn't the tools, it wasn't the systems. We're totally fine with that. It was the people side of kind of what we touched on a little bit yesterday. I think that making sure that people understand that they don't have to be on camera all the time.
Right.
And that they have to set boundaries between work and home and how to actually effectively work remotely. Because some of us have been working remotely for years, but for a lot of people, that was a whole brand new experience. And so they really needed to know, how do I do this and not get distracted by the laundry or the kids or the dog or the 100 things you could be doing. So I think that was something that I should have done sooner for my team, certainly, was to give more of that training on how to work effectively. Everything doesn't have to be a meeting. And I ended up focusing a lot more on mental health
Mm.
than on tools. It was a lot more about, you guys are working way too hard. You have to set some boundaries. It's okay to turn the computer off. It's okay if you're overwhelmed by this entire situation to just take a mental health day, take an afternoon off, cancel all your meetings one day, do whatever you have to do. And so for me personally, I think that was an important lesson learned and an important opportunity to make talking about mental health in the workplace okay.
Yeah, and I appreciate that the panel kind of took some of that on too, because you have at one hand that report about how productive everyone is, but also that is kind of a symptom of that kind of lack of boundary as well. So how do you balance those two? So very, very important there. And you touched on it a little bit earlier, but also on the panel you talked a lot about kind of the internal company dynamics of how employees and teams and whatnot are working. But can you talk a little bit more about how you adapted to working with clients or external stakeholders from this kind of remote world? Were there new ways that you had to interface with them? You had mentioned the invoices, process change, those types of things. But were there other changes when you were working outside of the company with external folks that you had to do as well?
Yeah, we totally had that as a topic and just didn't get there because we were just having such a good conversation overall. But yes, we did talk about that. We talked amongst ourselves in preparation.
Yeah.
In terms of during the pandemic over the last year, we found that amongst all of our companies, whether it's Bentley or the AEC firms themselves, people had to get really good at communicating via video, via email. People had to be much more compelling in their messaging because it's coming through remotely. Nobody's sitting in front of you talking about it. So people had to get used to that. They had to understand camera placement to be able to make eye contact, to make the experience feel more real.
Mm-hmm.
And we also, obviously, with all of the travel bans in place, some of the companies on the panel with me had to shut down their field work because projects actually shut down for a while. So there was that challenge, as well as the challenge of what do you do with the field workers when they can't be in the field? You don't want to lay them off, because they're doing a great job. So companies wrestled with that. But certainly, I think that over time, as it became clear that the pandemic was not going away and people were going to have to figure this out, I think there was acceptance on all sides, client side as well as AEC firm side, that we were going to have to do more things like virtual design reviews, right, and virtual walkthroughs and things like that were just going to have to happen that way, because even though it might not be ideal, it was the only choice. But the other thing is, we also learned, and it turned into an opportunity, that while working with external stakeholders, because everybody was more accepting of being virtual, they didn't just get the person in their town. We could actually send, air quote, send the best consultant who might be, in Seattle when the customer's in New York. It didn't matter because everybody was very accepting of things being virtual. And I don't actually think that's going to change. I think that's a permanent thing. I think to use Linda's expression, although she used it in a different context, I think that our clients, and by our, I mean the whole industry, because that's where my background is, and not Bentley specific. I do think that AEC clients like being able to fish from the ocean, not the small pond. They get the best consultant on their job, not the one that's local.
Right. And kind of touching on that too, even before the pandemic, we were starting to see, because I cover technology across this whole broad spectrum and for AEC and beyond, but there's been a lot of investment in kind of collaborative technologies, like trying to solve that problem. More augmented reality for AEC, shared workspaces, streaming, 3D visualization, things like that. Do you envision that these types of tools are going to kind of continue to be pursued for collaboration, or do you think that, at some point that we're going to kind of go back to that much more in-person focused way of working, or are we going to continue kind of this path down the virtual meetings more than the in-person?
I think we're going to continue down the path of more virtual collaboration and less in-person collaboration. I think there will always be a place for purposeful collaboration and meetings, particularly, at milestones of a project, right? During the final proposal presentation, during design reviews, etc. But I think that through the process, not at the milestones, but in between the milestones, I don't think anyone's going to want to give up that technology. We've made the investment in it. The hard part's over. And I think now, I mean, when you think about the old McKinsey study, which had construction like only above farming, remember, in terms of digitalization, like how sad is that? But I think this whole experience has been a catalyst to digital transformation, and I think that firms are not going to let that go. And I actually think, based on some of the discussions that we had yesterday and some other discussions I've had with CIOs in the industry, I think it's actually going to continue and accelerate. And I think we're going to move more into a world where AEC firms are creating technologies themselves that they then sell to clients. So I think virtual is here to stay, and all of those tools, and more to come, way more to come.
So kind of continuing on that, kind of future envisioning, how do you imagine kind of the workplace of the future about, 5 years from now in AEC? What does that type of virtual collaboration look like? And what is kind of, if you had to imagine, put your virtual hat on as to what might the future workplace be?
If I close my eyes and imagine, first of all, the office of the future, I think the office of the future has many fewer cubes and offices. I think there will be anchor colleagues, anchor employees, those of the 25% or so, or 15%, according to Gartner, that actually want to come in the office every day. I think they will have assigned offices and cubes. And I think that everyone else, there won't be enough offices and cubes for everyone, on purpose, designed on purpose. They will have to reserve their space through some sort of reservation system, right? We're already trialing that here in Bentley in several of our offices. And as we renew leases, we will be renewing for less space. But we are also looking to reconfigure our space, and I think many are as well, to reduce the number of cubes and offices, but lots more collaboration spaces, lots more big meeting rooms or couches or booths or collections of chairs where people can get together and sit and chat and come together to work on a specific project. So I do think there will be many more collaboration spaces, but they will be purposeful. You're coming in for this specific meeting. So that's the workplace itself. I think the management style in the workplace will be different, because you can't, a lot of people still, I think up until the pandemic and now, if I'm honest, there are elements of people who have that, if I can't see you working, you're not actually working. I think over time, that mentality is fading, but certainly it's kind of still there right now. If we're talking 5 years out, I think that mentality, I hope, will have disappeared. I think people have proven themselves through this pandemic. But that will require a whole different type of management. It will require management by goals and management by OKRs and management by very measurable things, which maybe people aren't doing now. So I think that will look different. It will feel different, because as a colleague, you will feel more accountable to a specific thing, not just being busy, but having a very particular goal that you must achieve. So in some ways, that's going to be more challenging for people. It's also going to require, like we talked about yesterday, a different skill set for our managers. And I think the other thing that it's important to point out is while everybody's in the office, it's a level playing field. While everyone is remote, it's a level playing field. It's when you get this mixture that things get really hard because you have to be very careful to be as inclusive of the remote people as you are of the people in the office. And you don't, because you don't want to end up with like a team A and a team B kind of thing. So I think that's going to require some sensitivity on our managers' parts and some skill building in that area too, to keep engagement going, as well as for colleagues who are working in a hybrid manner and who aren't in the office to build up those skills of how do I be visible when I'm not there and other people might be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that kind of vision with us, and also just to kind of really dive into this a bit more, because, you know, a lot of people now, we're all talking about going back to normal or restoring to where we were, but really we're changing the processes of how we're working and collaborating together. And I think that session yesterday and this chat has been really informative to that, because I think it gives a lot of people different avenues to think about. There's a technology avenue, there's a management avenue, there's a people management, there's a mental health, there's all these factors that are going to come into play to continue to have successful workflows and successful employees. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks for answering my questions, and good luck. And I hope that the workplace of the future is just as awesome as it seems it may be.
I'm hoping so too. I'm determined to do what I can to make it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.